Story 1. Fire, Seth. The uninvited knocking on the door of darkness. That night, something came out of the woods. Ethan is a sophomore at a small university in Indiana. Not outstanding, not troublesome, not the type of person you would notice in a crowded room. But you're the type of person you'll remember forever if you ever sit next to you under the light of a campfire. That's Ethan, calm, composed, a little reserved, but when he tells the story, the whole world seems to stop breathing. The house where Ethan lives is located on the edge of a quiet residential area, where the boundary between humans and nature is separated only by an old wooden fence and a few bushes of weeds growing over the back path. Behind the house is the forest, not the dense forest like in the movies, but enough to create a wall of pitch-black trees at night. During the day, the forest looks harmless, even a little beautiful. Sunlight filtering through the foliage creates patches of light that dance on the ground. But at night it's different. At night, it breathes, and every breath is a suspicious whisper. Ethan is usually not afraid of the dark. He grew up in the middle of America, where the phone wasn't the thing that saved you from loneliness but the flashlight that saved you from raccoons in the warehouse. But Ethan confessed that since moving into this house, the nights there always made him feel like something was wrong. Not clear. Not specific, just a vague feeling, as if someone was watching you from the shadows, right behind the trees. The patio behind the house is where he often goes late at night, sitting with a cup of warm tea, looking at the stars, letting his mind wander. And there, under the patio, is the old hot tub that the previous homeowner left behind. In winter, steam rises from the tub, mixing with the cold air to form thin, misty mist. Ethan once joked with his friend that if there was a ghost living in that forest, it must be sitting somewhere in the mist, waiting for a reason to come out. Every night, before going to bed, Ethan often locks the patio door, checks the garden lights, and then peacefully goes to bed. But there were nights when he woke up startled and didn't understand why. No noise, there are no dreams, just a nameless worry squeezing his chest, making him open his eyes, heart pounding, and stare at the ceiling as if waiting for something to happen. Ethan says that night, the night it all began like any other night. The wind was light, it was cold, and the forest was suspiciously silent. He and his three best friends, Dylan, Marcus and Jay, had planned to meet on the last night before spring break ended. A simple evening, no big parties, no complicated plans, just a few close friends playing pool in the garage, playing loud music, drinking a few cold beers and talking about life. But what made that evening different from previous gatherings wasn't what they did, which is the thing waiting for them when they aren't paying attention. Ethan never thought that the uneasy feeling he always had about the woods behind his house was a warning. He learned to live with it, ignore it, laugh at it, and tell the forest reply. We'll tell the whole story in the next video, where a strange man comes out of the darkness and changes everything. But remember, every nightmare begins with a seemingly harmless evening. And Ethan? He was just planning to break up the holiday with a fun night with his friends. Instead, he fell into a moment that none of them would ever forget. If you ever lived next to the forest, if you ever wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, if you've ever felt like someone was watching you from behind a dark curtain, you understand, friend. No, that feeling is not imaginary. Sometimes, something is actually there. Fire if you want to hear the rest of the story, where things really start to get creepy. Remember, right finger click register channel after 0 hours. Thumbs up click like if you ever feel like something is wrong in the dark. Repeat button share video if you think someone else needs to hear Ethan's story, to be vigilant, or to believe they are not alone. We don't tell stories to scare you, but just so you know, some things are real. One last night, where innocent laughter becomes something we will never hear the same again. The whole year passed faster than they thought. And then, spring break came. A rare bit of freedom in the midst of the study cycle, where time seemed to stop, allowing people to live slowly and truly. For Ethan and his three best friends, Dylan, Marcus, and Jay, vacation isn't about luxury flights or wild beach parties. That's about it friendship, about celebrate, and one belonging to years they knew would never repeat. They planned that last night as a way to hold on to that feeling. Not too noisy, not too crowded, just 4 people. 4 boys who grew up together, now standing on the threshold of adulthood. saying goodbye to their carefree days. Saturday, March 29th. The clock struck 12:30 a.m. Ethan's garage was filled with music from a Bluetooth speaker. The dim lights reflecting their silhouettes on the worn wooden billiard table. Every ball shot is a burst of laughter. Every beer can clink together is an implicit promise. We will never change. Marcus stood in the corner, pressed the button to change the song, and said, "This is the last night. Guys, the next time we see each other again it might be summer." Jay, his hand on the billiard cue, burst out laughing. "You talk like we're going to die." "Grandpa." Ethan said nothing. He just smiled, his eyes absent-mindedly looking through the slightly open garage door. The cold wind blew gently, bringing with it the familiar smell of rotten wood from the forest behind the house. Something about this night made him feel strange, but he didn't mind. Not now. They continued to play, continued to laugh. None of them knew that each moment was counting down to something they would never forget for the rest of their lives. When the clock neared 1 a.m., Dylan, who was always the most excited person in the group, shouted, "Hey guys, let's go soak in the hot tub. It's cold and soaking in hot water will be the end of the story." Ethan looked outside, the deep night sky, the trees like silent shadows swaying with the wind. He hesitated a bit, but then nodded. Last night. And because. The whole group loudly ran into the room and changed clothes. They walked out onto the patio. The hot tub radiated faint warmth in the cold air. They soak in, relax their bodies, and let the water soothe their fatigue. Music. In that moment, life was like a slow-motion movie. There are no deadlines, no pressure, only four boys, in the pale yellow light and warm steam, thought that this world would never end. But there's something heard them, and that thing is moving towards them. When we are in the most beautiful moment, we never think it can turn into a nightmare in just one breath. Ethan laughed with his friends, clinked glasses, said, "We should do this every vacation." Little did you know that in just a few minutes, a stranger will come out of the forest, destroy everything. That night wasn't just the last night of spring break. That is the last night they felt the world was a safe place. Hourglass, and you won't want to miss the next part, where the silence of the forest is torn apart by a strange voice, an expressionless face, and a revelation that freezes the blood in each person in the group. Fire subscribe now to the After 0 Hours channel to don't miss the ending of the story, where sadness incomprehensible. Thumbs up if you have ever had one. Send mail, because one last night could be the one you never forget. The water is warm, but there's something in the wind. The cold outdoors causes dry, cracked skin and smoky breathing. But for four close friends, it makes the idea of soaking in a hot tub irresistible. Marcus, who was already blushing from the beer, clapped his hands as if he had just discovered a miracle. "Guys, in this cold weather, you can sit in a hot tub, drink beer, listen to music, top of the top." Jay laughed loudly. Kyle, the quietest person in the group, just nodded slightly. But his eyes said more than any words. Ethan saw it, and it was Ethan who first stood up, put down his billiard cue and said, "Let's go, before God changes his mind." In just a few minutes, the group changed into their swimsuits, wrapped towels around their shoulders, grabbed cold beer cans, and walked out onto the patio behind the house. The cold air hit their faces like sober slaps, but in front of them, the hot water was steaming hotly, inviting like AC. The water tank is located right under the wooden porch, next to the worn fence that separates the backyard from the dark forest behind. When stepping into the warm water, each person seemed to melt into a sigh of satisfaction. Ethan leaned back, eyes closed. "Hey Kyle, smile. It looks like you've been forced to soak in hot water." Kyle just smiled slightly, but Ethan noticed that smile wasn't deep enough, and his eyes didn't smile as well. After a few jokes, Ethan gently nudged Kyle's shoulder underwater. "Are you okay?" Kyle was silent for a bit. Then he spoke, his voice so low that only Ethan could hear. "My mother was hospitalized last week. It's cancer again. I don't dare tell anyone because I don't want to make you guys lose interest." Ethan gently squeezed your shoulder, not saying anything. No need. In that hot water, amidst the laughter of the other two people, there was a moment of silence that lasted longer than usual. 1 second is enough to engrave something in someone's heart. This story is not just scary. It is about where does the real cold come from? The group started talking about all sorts of things, summer plans, girls in class, difficult teachers. Bustling music rang out from the Bluetooth speaker placed on the bench. The rising steam blurred Jay's glasses, making Marcus burst out laughing. Ethan laughed along, but his eyes were still directed toward the dark trees behind the fence. The forest that night was quieter than usual. There are no insect sounds. There was no howling wind. Only a deep darkness as are. Ethan looked over at Kyle. For the first time in weeks, he truly saw his friend relax, temporarily forget. Goodbye. Drink to celebrate the last time we can be this stupid. JH. The whole group clinked cans. The clang sound rang out, spreading into the quiet space. None of them knew that can will be the last sound to echo inside. Because the next moment, something will come out of the forest. The story that night began like any other night, with friendship, laughter, and the fragile hope that this world is still good enough for growing souls. But things change, not for an obvious reason, but because of the silence of darkness finally spoke. That's when a stranger, unbidden, interrupted. VDO, will make you never. Movie camera if you're listening and feel connected to Ethan, Kyle and this group of friends. Don't miss the next episode. Right finger please register to not miss the scary truth waiting for them behind the fence. Thumbs up like if you ever share. Repeat button share too. Because one last night is more than just that. That sound, it's small, but it's enough to make every heart stop beating for a moment. The water in the tub is still warm. The foam bubbled gently, reflecting the dim backyard lights, creating a seemingly peaceful scene. Ethan leaned his head back and closed his eyes for a few seconds. He let himself melt into the music, the laughter of his friends, and the warm feeling that enveloped his whole body. A truly happy moment, even if it was fleeting. Jay was telling a funny story about the time he fell in gym class trying to impress his new girlfriend. Marcus laughed so hard that the water overflowed the tub. Kyle smiled too, for the first time tonight. His smile wasn't forced. And then, that sound rang out. Crack. A branch snapping, clear, sharp and cold. Not huge, but too close. Everyone fell silent. All sound seemed to be drained from the air. Ethan opened his eyes. Jay stopped talking. Marcus held his breath. Kyle turned around so quickly that the water splashed out of the tub. No one said anything for the first few seconds. They all just looked at each other, eyes wide, trying to analyze what that sound was, or eat satisfied. Crack. Second time. Ethan sat up straight, water dripping from his hair down his neck. He looked toward the low wooden fence separating his yard and the forest. There's nothing but darkness, Kyle said softly, his voice hoarse. Did anyone hear that? Listen, Ethan replied. Marcus swallowed. Maybe it's a squirrel or something. Jay shook his head, his eyes glued to the deep black space in front of him. Sounds like human legs. You know. A heavy silence fell over the group of friends. Under the hot water, their hearts beat rapidly. No one said another word for several minutes. There is only the gentle sound of water bubbling. Marcus with Ethan stood up, wrapped the towel around himself and walked towards the fence. He didn't intend to do anything reckless. He just wanted to get a better look, confirm that they were just scaring themselves. But as he approached the fence, he heard one breath. Not from anyone in the group. Not of the wind. A short breath. Ethan stood still, not moving. In his mind, he couldn't stop the question. Who's there? And why are they standing in the woods, silently, looking at us? He backed away, not turning his back. Is there anyone there? Ethan spoke up. There was no reply. Only the sound of insects suddenly rose from another corner of the forest. As if to make the situation more tense, Jay called out from the water tank. Quote, and then, just as Ethan set foot on the patio floor, there was a cold wind unusually strong. Chief, the light is dead? Marcus stuttered. It can't be, it was just changed last week, Ethan said, his hands shaking. Once again, the space was filled with silence until footsteps appeared. Not one, not evenly. It was a series of crunching sounds. Stepping on dry leaves and tree branches. Walking intermittently as if the person was standing and watching. Then took a few more steps, then stopped. Ethan turned on the flashlight on his phone. The light is weak. Didn't see anyone. But, for a second, he swore he saw it. One Don't move. No response. Just standing there. At that moment, Ethan didn't just feel scared. He felt the feeling. This is no longer a joke. No longer a stranger in the forest. And it's not for everyone. It's for Ethan. If you have ever felt as if there was someone standing in the dark, without speaking, without coming close, you still then you will understand Ethan. If you've ever stood in the middle of a group of friends, amidst laughter, and suddenly found yourself completely simple, then you know what. Movie camera, we still have a lot left unsaid, because the worst hasn't happened yet. Right finger register now to follow step. Thumbs up, like. Repeat button shared to there are footsteps. Because when the line between the safe world and the unexplainable is just a step. When the yard lights turned back on after a strange flicker, everything seemed to return to normal. The sound of water bubbling lightly. The music just turned back on. Ethan looked around, seeing nothing clearly but the fence and quiet trees. Even though his heart was still pounding, he tried to appear stable in front of his friends. No one wants to be the first to admit they're scared. Marcus refilled the can of beer. Jay laughed, splashing the water to create foam. Kyle looked down at the water, his eyes empty as if trying to dispel something. Ethan leaned his head against the edge of the tub again and took a deep breath. Maybe it's just the wind. Or squirrels. Or, he didn't dare finish that thought. And then, he appeared. A dark shadow stepped out from the edge of the forest, as if uninvited. Unannounced. Without a warning sound. Just a silhouette, appearing in the dim patio light. Everything stopped. No laughter. No music. Only the sound of dripping water and panicked eyes. Man wearing a knee-length black coat. Stained white sweatpants. And on top of a gaming headset looks out of place. As if it doesn't belong in the real world. But what made Ethan feel the coldest? To be his face. Pale. No emotions. Eyes wide open as if forced to look forever without blinking. Jay was the first to speak. Hey, who are you? The man stopped and stood in the middle of the backyard. As if the patio lights were a stage and he was the main actor. He slowly raised his hands, not threatening, nor surrendering, but like someone trying to prove that he was harmless. My name is Seth, he said. His voice was monotonous and lifeless like a loop recording. I'm 33 years old. I heard the laughter, and I just wanted to join in. No one reacted. Ethan stood up from the tub, clutching the towel. You're in my yard. You need to leave. Seth tilted his head, as if that sentence wasn't programmed into his brain. I heard laughter. He repeated, I think maybe I can laugh. His facial expression did not change. There was no movement on the face, just wide eyes and a smile. Non-existent. Marcus stepped back in the tub. Jay grabbed Kyle's arm. And then, to the group's surprise, Seth started to undress. Say nothing. Don't ask permission. No explanation. He slowly took off his black coat, folded it and placed it on the ground. Next is a pair of old shoes with frayed edges. Already, he dropped his pants, reveal only a pair of stretched silver gray underwear remained. No one had time to react. Ethan took a step back, his heart pounding so hard he couldn't hear anything other than the sound of blood echoing in his ears. Seth stepped into the tub. Step by step slowly. No hesitation. No questions asked. It was as if he belonged there. The water rose, gently rippling around his body, thin, pale, small scratches clearly visible on his arms and calves. The whole group was silent. Frozen. They don't know what this is, a sick joke. A lost psychopath. Or something worse. Ethan pulled out his phone, not to call, but to dial back. Not because this is funny, but because there are things you need proof of, when you don't even believe you're truly living. The camera angle shakes. The lighting is weak, but in that video, you will see 4 people sat on one side. And a stranger does not belong to them, soaking in the water. No expression, no explanation, just silence, as if he was waiting for the next part. If you ever find yourself in a moment where the world suddenly loses all logic, you will understand them. If you've ever stood among close friends and recognized one person completely strange barged in, without anyone inviting, you will understand the feeling of being penetrated not only by the body, but also by the mind. Seth didn't just walk into their yard. He entered their last safe zone, and shattered it with the most terrible silence. And then, he will say something. One thing that makes their blood freezes immediately in warm water. Movie camera, if you have followed this story this far, then you know. This is no longer a joke. Right finger, please subscribe to After 0 Hours channel to listen now the bizarre and sickening words Seth was about to utter. Something that would make the group jump out of the tub in panic. Thumbs up like if you've ever witnessed a stranger entering your space, and all your senses screaming. Something is very wrong. Repeat button share to others know that a blank smile is sometimes the scariest thing you'll ever see. Because sometimes, those who come to hear the laughter are those who have lost their souls long ago. There are moments when the absurdity of the world suddenly becomes a nightmare, and you just stand there. Motionless, too confused to be afraid. Seth stepped into the hot water as if it were obvious. As if he belonged there. No permission asked. No invitation. Only silence, and the water broke into small ripples. Surrounding his pale body. Wrapped only in a pair of stretched out underwear. The whole group of friends froze in shock. They don't scream. Don't react immediately. There was a strange moment that lasted like a lifetime. Where all there was the sound of dripping water and silent eyes. Ethan feels disconnected from reality. Everything he knew about the world, about civility, about rules, about personal boundaries, about control, was shattered right before his eyes, by simple and crazy action of a stranger, naturally undressing and entering the most private, intimate place between close friends. Ethan is not the type of person who gets angry easily, but his heart was beating so hard that he felt nauseous. He looked over at Kyle. He sat still, his face pale, his hands clutching the edge of the tub. Maybe because this loss of control reminded him of the feeling he had experienced too many times in the hospital, when Kyle's mother was no longer conscious due to medication. Jay opened his mouth to say something, but only let out a loud sigh. Marcus was the first to react clearly. Hey, no, you can't do that. Get out of here now. Seth didn't come back. He leaned back, placed his hands on the edge of the tub, and looked straight up at the sky. In a leisurely way, a calmness strange and scary. Ethan stepped back out of the water, pulled the towel around him, and picked up his phone again, with trembling fingers tapping video. Not because he wanted to keep anything, but because part of him knew, this was a moment no one outside their group would believe. You are violating privacy, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice calm. This is my house. You have to leave, now. Seth did not respond. His eyes still looked straight. His mouth began to curl up, not into a smile, but like one lifeless twitching of facial muscles. And then he spoke. Just one sentence. One sentence makes everything collapsed. I once did bad things to a child. All sounds stopped. No longer weird. It's no longer uninvited. That's a crime. Is real darkness. Ethan felt a cold chill spread from my spine to my neck. Kyle stood up, causing water to spill out. Marcus shouted, "What did you say? What did you say?" Jay didn't wait another second. He jumped out of the tub, backing away quickly as if the water had been poisoned. Ethan doesn't remember who pulled Seth out of the tub first. Maybe it was him. Could be Marcus. Just remember that his hand trembled when he touched that cold skin. Pulled him up and pushed him off the edge of the tub. Seth did not resist. He left his 4 friends, no longer the carefree boys of a few minutes ago, pushing and pulling him out of the peaceful place he considered his own. As he stood there, drenched in the pale yellow light, his thin body trembling slightly in the wind, he doesn't apologize, not angry, say nothing more, him just look, eyes wide open, expressionless face. There was no sign of fear or remorse. Already, he turned his back and slowly walked towards the forest, where just a few minutes ago was the backdrop to laughter and friendship. Now it becomes a portal to an unknown obsession. Ethan and the group ran into the house, locked all the doors, pulled the curtains, and turned off the music. They didn't speak for several minutes. Just the sound of breathing, the sound of my heart beating in my ears, and the feeling just encountered something incomprehensible and impossible to erase. Marcus walked over, checking each lock. Jay holds a kitchen knife. Kyle plopped down in his chair, covering his face with his hands. Ethan stood leaning against the wall, his phone still spinning. The screen was still recording. Now there was only the image of the water tank as still as a mirror and a misty mist. There are cracks in human memory, which, once created, can never be healed. And that night, in the very place they believed to be the last safe space, such a crack was just deepened. Movie camera, are you still following this story? Stop for a second. Imagine you're with your closest friends, and a stranger walks in without permission and confesses such a terrible thing. Right finger subscribe to the After 0 Hours channel to watch the next part, where the fear comes not just from Seth, but from something made him come back when everyone thought he was gone. Thumbs up like if you believe there are behaviors that cross the line that are abnormal and should be remembered as a warning. Repeat button share so that others understand. Silence is not always peace. There are things lurking, waiting until you are at your most relaxed. Because when a stranger enters the world you thought was your own, you are never the same person again. One sentence, just 6 words, is enough to kill faith in people. The silence that followed those words froze the air around the hot tub. Ethan didn't understand right away. He heard clearly, but his brain refused to process. It was like a broken audio clip. Listening again, I still couldn't believe that a stranger, just a few minutes ago standing in the dark forest, was now sitting alone in the water. Just said something so terrible that it cannot be explained with common sense. I once did bad things to a child. Seth said so. No shaking. Don't avoid it. His eyes were still wide open, his mouth mumbling as if he were recounting a small detail of an ordinary day. No one laughed. No one said, "Just kidding?" Only silence remained, heavy as a hammer hitting each person's chest. Marcus stood up first. He shouted loudly, not out of anger, but because horrifying. "What did you say? What did you just say?" Kyle was petrified, his eyes glued to Seth, his lips moving but unable to utter a word. Jay jumped out of the tub, tripped over the edge of the rock, and fell to the patio floor but didn't care. He jumped up immediately, turned around and ran into the house. Ethan couldn't move. His whole body seemed to be held tightly by an invisible string. It's not because you're weak, but because he was facing something that humans were not prepared to face. The admission of someone who ruined someone's childhood, said calmly, as if it were just a detail in a personal file. For a moment, Ethan could no longer hear Jay's footsteps, Marcus's screams or Kyle's gasps. There was only one sound repeating in his head. Doing bad things, with a child. There are no words enough to describe that feeling. It's not about fear. It's not a shock. It's a deep form of despair. When you realize the world may contain things you never wanted to know, but now know and can't forget. Ethan returned to reality when Marcus rushed towards Seth, grabbed his arm and yanked him out of the tub. "Get out of here. Are you crazy?" Seth didn't react. Don't resist. He just stood up, leaving his wet body showing every rib and old bruise. Eyes still didn't leave the group of friends, as if he is studying them, or worse, enjoy their reactions. Ethan quickly wrapped a towel around himself, then stepped forward to help Marcus pull Seth out. Kyle still hadn't moved, but his eyes were now filled with tears. It was an image Ethan would never forget. His friend, who always tried to appear strong, was now shaking, as if he was no longer here, but reliving something old and painful. Later, Ethan will ask Kyle why that was like that, and Kyle would be silent for a long moment, before saying that his mother was attacked when she was a child. He never told anyone, only heard his mother say it one night, when she was crying in the hospital room and thought she wouldn't wake up after surgery. "When a guy confesses that to my face," Kyle said, "I don't see him, I only see my mother. When she was a baby." Seth stood on the wooden patio floor, water dripping from his feet into a puddle. He didn't say sorry. He didn't explain. He just stood there, motionless, as if it were natural for him to be pulled out of the tub. Then slowly, he turned his back and walked slowly towards the wooden fence. His thin shadow blended into the deep black of the forest, and just a few seconds later, disappeared completely. No one chased. No one dared to utter another word. There was only the sound of water dripping from the eaves into the sink. Sounds so small that no one would normally notice. Now resounding like the sigh of the house itself. Jay locked all the doors. Ethan went to check the lights. Marcus sat on the floor, holding his head. Kyle went into his room, closed the door, didn't say anything until the next morning. Ethan sat alone on the sofa, holding his phone. The video was still being stored. He watched the clip again, not out of curiosity, but because of a question that haunted his mind. Who would say something like that to a stranger? In the middle of the night? In the backyard of a strange house? No one knows. But Ethan knows one thing. Real nightmares don't come from blood or knives. It comes from the terrifying calmness in the eyes of the person confessing the crime, when you don't know what he has left unsaid. Movie camera, you've followed this far, and perhaps, like Ethan, you're also wondering, why would someone like Seth do that? And, what's even more terrifying waiting behind the trees in the dark? Right finger, please subscribe now to After 0 Hours channel to watch the next part. When they thought it was all over, well, Seth returned. Without warning. Thumbs up like if you've ever witnessed a stranger say something that changed the atmosphere around you, freeze completely. Repeat button, share so that others understand. Not all madness screams loudly. Some just whisper, and wait for you to hear. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the killer. It's the person who did something terrible, and still smiled as if it was normal. There are shadows that don't need to knock. They just need to stand there, and you'll see how fragile the world you believed in for so long really is. Seth stood in the pale yellow light of the patio. Soaking wet, freezing, not speaking, not moving. Steam rose from his body like mist, clinging to the floor tiles, making the backyard look like an abandoned theater. The light from the kitchen passed through the glass window, dimly illuminating his face, emotionless, distant, as if the soul had long left the body. Marcus was still standing a few steps away, his hands shaking with anger, fear, and not being able to understand what had just happened. Jay, from inside, hid behind the door, his eyes showing unprecedented panic. Kyle didn't say a word, he bowed his head, standing still like a stone statue, his hands gripping the edge of the water tank so tightly that his tendons burst. Ethan, who still had his phone in his hand, stopped filming. He stopped because something is too wrong to keep. Seth tilted his head slightly to the side, looking at them as if wondering why everyone looked so panicked. Then, without anyone saying anything else, he turned around, walked slowly back into the forest. Not a single sigh, not a single greeting. There was only the sound of wet, steady footsteps, blending into the darkness behind the old wooden fence. And he disappeared, as if he had never existed. As soon as his shadow disappeared behind the trees, the whole group ran into the house almost at the same time. They locked all the doors. Peg, draw the curtains. But the doors cannot be locked. What is lurking in their minds? Jay walked around the house, constantly checking the windows. He picked up the kitchen knife from the drawer as an instinctive reflex. Marcus punched the wall hard and then sat down on the floor, knees bent to his chest. Ethan closed the patio door and leaned back against it, breathing hard, as if the very air had betrayed them. Kyle hasn't come into the house yet. He stood in the dark in the hallway, staring into the bathroom mirror as if trying to find a way to escape his body. Ethan stepped closer. Hey, are you okay? Kyle did not answer. Ethan gently touched his shoulder. I don't know who he is, but he's gone now. I'm here. We're all here. A few seconds of silence passed. Then Kyle uttered a sentence so quiet that Ethan almost didn't hear it. I used to think, if one day something like that happened, I would fight, but I just stood there. Ethan looked at his friend. In Kyle's eyes there was shame, not because of him, but because yourself, because the pain he once heard about from his mother, now became a real, vivid obsession, right in front of him. And you didn't do anything. Ethan squeezed Kyle's shoulder without saying a word. You know, silence is sometimes the only thing that keeps people from falling. That night, they didn't sleep. No one wants to enter a private room. No one wants to turn off all the lights. Jay lay on the sofa hugging his pillow, knife placed next to him. Marcus sat huddled in the dining chair, occasionally looking up through the curtains as if hoping Seth wouldn't come back. Ethan stayed awake, sitting next to the patio door, phone in hand but not daring to open the recorded video. He wasn't sure he wanted to remember that image. Near 4 a.m., Kyle, the quietest person of the night, stood up. He walked over to the Bluetooth speaker and turned off the music, which had been playing a light instrumental song from earlier. Quiet is better, Kyle said softly. Easy to hear if he comes back. Ethan just nodded. They wait. Nothing happened. There are no footsteps. There was no sign of people. There was only the ticking of the clock. And the insecurity keeps spreading like spider silk. When it's morning, the sunlight doesn't bring the peace of mind it usually does. Instead, it made the scene brutally naked and clear, as if last night had not been a nightmare. But obvious truth, the hot tub is still there. On the edge of the tub, the cold wet trace of a stranger still lingers. On the field, black jacket that Seth left behind, still lying on the stone floor. Wet, heavy. No one dares to touch it. Jay suggested calling the police. Marcus agrees. Kyle was silent. And Ethan, the only person who recorded part of the event, just said, "I don't want anyone else to think this is a joke. I want them to know this happened." But the truth is, there are some things that even if recorded, the feeling cannot be expressed. The feeling of being invaded, not just your home, but your memories, your inner peace. Ethan isn't just afraid of Seth. You're afraid that such a person could exist, can reach them, easily, ridiculously, and quietly entered and then disappeared like a ghost. But the scariest thing is the feeling that he will come back. Because people like Seth don't simply disappear. They always leave something behind. An unspoken promise. Movie camera, if you've ever found yourself in this story, if you've ever trembled when a stranger disrupted your safest space, then you understand. Right finger, please subscribe to the After 0 Hours channel to watch the next part, when the group thinks it's all over. But then, they discover a clue that makes things worse. Thumbs up like if you've ever felt helpless because you couldn't react at a critical moment. Repeat button, share to remind someone. Invisible wounds are real, and they stay longer than you think. Because not all fears scream. There are some that just stand there and look. A phone that belonged to none of them, but contained something none of them wanted to see. They didn't sleep all night. Every door is locked. Every curtain is drawn. No one is laughing anymore. No one dared to leave each other's sight for too long. The silence was broken only by intermittent sighs and the ringing of the phone every time someone checked the time. Ethan sat on his knees in the living room, looking out at the backyard through the gap in the curtain. Kyle sat close by, eyes sunken, still not saying too much since Seth disappeared into the woods. He felt stuck somewhere, not here, not now. About 15 minutes after everything calmed down, Kyle stood up. "I think I should lock the lid." Ethan Key sang. "Now?" Kyle nodded. "Yeah, I don't want to wake up tomorrow morning and see something in there. Or someone." Those words made Ethan shiver. But you understand, after that night, nothing was ridiculous anymore. Both took flashlights, opened the back door, and walked out onto the patio. The remaining fog of the previous night still hung above the ground like the breath of the forest. The light shines through the thin mist, gently sweeping across the now cold water tank. Everything looked normal, but that normality is what makes Ethan feel uneasy. It's as if the world is trying to pretend nothing has happened, while everything has been destroyed from the ground up. They approached the tub, hands grasping the hard plastic lid. But when Ethan bent down to check the corner on the side of the tub, you see it. A black, rectangular object lies hidden under the edge of the patio, just a few steps from the water tank. Ethan shined his light closer. To be a phone. He picked it up. The first feeling of touch is chill. Moist and slightly sticky. No cover. Scratched back. "Kyle," Ethan called. "Is anyone's phone dropped?" Kyle stepped forward. "Look." "No, not ours." The phone lit up as soon as Ethan pressed the button on the side. The screen appears. There is a password, but that wasn't what startled Ethan. Is the background image. He only had time to catch a glimpse before his grip loosened and he dropped the phone to the patio floor with a dry click. Kyle bent down to pick it back up, but Ethan held his hand, his voice urgent. Don't look. What's up?" Ethan took a deep breath, not knowing how to explain. "It's a baby, sleeping." But the face. He couldn't continue talking. That image only lasted a second, but stuck straight into his mind like broken glass. He wasn't sure if it was real, or just his imagination mixed with fear from the terrible night. Kyle pressed further, but Ethan just shook his head. "We brought it into the house. We shouldn't leave it out here." They carefully held the phone by the towel, as if it were a contaminated object. Returning to the house, they placed it on the table, staring at it for a few seconds. Jay and Marcus turned around after the noise. Jay is quick-witted. "What is that?" "Phone," Kyle said, "located near the water tank." Marcus stepped forward, but Ethan raised his hand to stop him. "Shouldn't open it. There's something wrong." Jay looked closely at the darkened screen. "Who left it? Is it Seth's?" Ethan nodded, not sure. "But feel like that. No one wants to open their phone. But no one wants to leave it. It's as if it's holding onto a piece of the nightmare, And if they don't control it, it will opens again. Marcus finally took the phone. Something has to be done. Take it to the police? Not now, Ethan said. I don't know what's in there. And what if it's not his? No one answered. But that spreads a new fear. If this isn't Seth's phone, then whose is it? And who left it there? Kyle still didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor next to the dining table, his eyes never leaving the phone lying still. Ethan stayed nearby, occasionally looking at his watch. 3:11 a.m. At that moment, the phone screen lit up again. No one touches it. No one gave orders. No notifications. It light up. Kyle stood up. Ethan reflexively pulled him back. Jay and Marcus rushed out from the other room because of the light shining from the table. All four people stood around the phone. Look. On the lock screen. No name. No message. Just image. Still a baby. But this time, its eyes opened wide. Movie camera, do you feel something growing? Not just ordinary fear, but something deeper. One kind haunting without pictures or words, but lurking in every small detail. Right finger subscribe to the After 0 Hours channel to watch the next part, where the mysteries of the phone will take them a vortex with no way out. And Ethan was faced with the question, will he really leave, or is he just waiting? Thumbs up like if you've ever felt insecure when holding something that doesn't belong to you, but carries a message for yourself. Repeat button share to remind someone. There are doors that shouldn't be opened, even if it's just a phone screen. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't who's standing in front of you. It's what's looking at you, from inside a dark screen. A gentle tap on the window, and all reason to sleep peacefully disappears. Since picking up the phone under the hot tub, no one in the group feels like this place is home anymore. They don't talk loudly, don't laugh, or play music, just moving quietly, eyes always gliding toward the window or the darkness behind the curtains, as if afraid that the silence itself would suddenly be interrupted. Ethan had never seen his house so strange. The phone was still on the kitchen table, wrapped in a towel. No one dared to touch it again. Sometimes, it lights up again, no messages, no calls, simply the lock screen showing the image of that boy, as a reminder that this is not over yet. Jay suggested throwing the phone away. Marcus wanted to hand it over to the police. Kyle just shook his head and said, if he goes back to look, and doesn't find the phone, it will be even worse. Ethan was silent, because Kyle is right. Tonight, they don't dare sleep, but sobriety cannot save the gradually panicking mind. Around 2:30 a.m. everything fell into the kind of quiet that only places where horrors have happened can create, a quiet distorted by memories and anticipation. Ethan sat close to the window, baseball bat across his lap. Kyle curled up on the sofa, eyes still open. Jay fell asleep in a sitting position, and Marcus was checking the back door for the 6th time, holding a flashlight as if guarding the boundary between the two worlds. And then, the first knock sounded. Not big, no rush, just an hour, clack. Very light, but the timing was too good to be coincidental. Ethan jumped up. Kyle also immediately sat up straight, eyes red from lack of sleep but alert. Jay woke up and muttered, "What is it?" Marcus ran in from behind, his face drained of blood. Window. Living room. Ethan slowly opened the curtain a little. His heart was beating so hard that his scalp felt like it was about to tear. And just as he feared, there he stood. Seth. The shadow cannot be forgotten. The face was expressionless, eyes wide open, lips slightly pursed as if trying to hold back a half smile. Don't say, don't move, don't hyperventilate, just standing there. Look, the light in the house dimly illuminated his pale skin, his eyes almost unblinking. Ethan felt like he was being watched by a doll rather than a human being. He's back, Ethan said, his voice choked. It's him. Kyle stepped forward, grabbing the window frame as if holding back the fear with his muscles. Marcus pulled out his phone and called the police immediately. A man named Seth, 33 years old, broke into the house last night. Now he's back. He's standing outside the window, still here. Ethan couldn't hear clearly what was said on the other end of the line. All his attention was drawn towards Seth's eyes, eyes that never wavered. Did not blink, as if he did not come here to communicate, but to witness. He opened the front door, baseball bat in hand. Jay shouted, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't let him stand there like that," Ethan said, his voice choked up. I want him to know, this is the boundary. The door opened. Cold wind rushed in. Ethan walked out onto the porch. The light from the porch light illuminating the yard. Seth was no longer standing in front of the door. He went around to the side of the house. Ethan walked slowly toward the patio. His heart pounding. His hands clenching his cane. He looked through the glasses, and met those eyes again. Right outside the patio. Seth was standing next to the water tank. Cold, wet, and, smile. Not clear. Unnatural. Just a slight curve on the lips, enough to see it doesn't come from joy. Which from power. Seth, Ethan screamed. I called the police. You need to get out of here. Seth didn't react. Don't panic. Don't back down. He just raised his hand, and waved. Once. The gesture was so light it was scary. It was as if he knew he didn't need to do anything more. As if it was all over before they found out. And then, he turned his back and quietly walked towards the forest. Ethan did not chase. No shouting. He just stood there, speechless. Because part of him knew. Seth didn't come back to hurt them, but to finish something. When the police arrived, Seth was no longer there. They searched the woods near the backyard. And found him standing alone in the middle of an empty lot. Just over 30 meters from the house. He did not resist. Don't run. Don't say. Just stand and look. Ethan watched the police handcuff him and lead him away. The car lights flashing across his skin, making him look like a silent mannequin set up in the middle of a real-life stage. They thought, maybe this was the end. But Ethan didn't believe it. Because the way Seth looked back one last time, as if sending an unspoken promise, made him understand. There are people who don't come to destroy. They came to sow seeds. Movie camera you're watching, and if you've felt your chest tighten like Ethan. If you've ever looked into someone's eyes and knew they weren't there just for you. But for something more terrifying than you can understand. Then you are not alone. Right finger please subscribe to the After 0 Hours channel to follow the sequel. When Ethan discovers that Seth isn't the only one. And the forest behind the house is not just a forest. Thumbs up like if you've ever been haunted by someone's eyes that you can't explain. Repeat button share to let others know that not everyone who stands still does nothing. Some are just waiting for the right moment. Because there are knocks at the door, not to ask for entry. It's to remind you, you have been chosen. Just because there's a police officer doesn't mean you'll feel safe. Especially when what you're facing isn't afraid of the law. When Seth waved and turned to walk into the forest. Everyone in the house still stood frozen behind the glass door. No one moved. That gesture, seemingly harmless. Just a light wave, carried terrible weight. Like a final mark for a verdict that had not yet been read. It doesn't feel like goodbye at all. It's like confirmation that he will come back. Ethan let go of the doorframe. The baseball bat still clenched in his hand. His palms sweating. Kyle was silent, leaning his forehead against the wall. His eyes red from being awake and from something else. Something Ethan felt but didn't dare name. Will the police come? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. They said they were on their way. Kyle replied, curtly. 11 minutes later. Police sirens sounded in front of the house, not loud, not urgent, but enough to let everyone know they were no longer alone. 2 officers got out of the car, one young, fresh-looking, the other is older. Seems experienced but tired. Ethan came out to greet them, telling them everything, from the first sound in the woods to the moment Seth stood by the window. His voice was shaky but clear. Each sentence seemed torn from a memory too fresh to be called memory. The old officer named Daniels nodded, taking notes, expressionless. The young man, Foster, appeared more alert, his eyes constantly looking towards the forest. You said he wore underwear and soaked in the tub? Ethan nodded. And then, confessed to a serious crime? Ethan swallowed. Yes, he said, he once did bad things to a child. Verbatim. Both officers looked at each other. Daniels let out a breath. We will find him, if he is still in the area. We will take him to the station and clarify everything. The flashlight is turned on. The 2 officers headed into the woods behind the house, the direction Seth had disappeared from. The 4 people in the house stood on the patio, looking at the small light flickering between the dark trees. Everything was unnaturally quiet, as if the forest was holding its breath. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Ethan started to feel worried. Jay went inside. Kyle sat down on the steps. Marcus kept walking back and forth. constantly glancing at the clock. At the 23rd minute, Daniels called out, "Found it." The whole group was heartbroken. "Seth is still there. Don't run away. Don't move." He stood still in the middle of an empty space about 40 meters from the house, directly opposite the patio, and looked. Only look. Officer Foster recounted later. "He didn't say anything, didn't run, just looked at you guys. As if we didn't exist." Daniels motioned for handcuffs. He did not resist. He let his wrists be pulled behind his back, letting the cold metal squeeze into his skin. On his face, not a single expression change. Ethan, from afar, saw the scene, a wet, shirtless man, his skin prickling from the cold, being escorted like a ghost, was pulled out of the shelter. They put Seth in the car. Daniels walked closer to Ethan. "For the time being, he is being held for trespassing. We will check his background and mental health." "And the confession?" Ethan asked. Daniels frowned and sighed. "There is no victim, no time, no location, no evidence. Unless someone accuses, or he clearly confesses, we cannot prosecute." Ethan stiffened. "You mean, if there's nothing concrete, he will be released?" Daniels did not immediately respond. Finally he just said, "We will hold him for 48 hours. Depending on the results of the evaluation." As the police car rolled out of the yard, leaving flashing red and blue lights on the dew-wet road, Ethan felt no relief in his heart. There is just another layer of fog, of doubt and helplessness. Kyle quietly stood up, his eyes still watching the rear of the car disappear. Jay entered the house and suddenly turned on the music, as if wanting to break the atmosphere. Marcus sat down on the doorstep, his knees bent, his eyes dull. Ethan, the only person still standing outside, could only think to himself, if he just stands there, doing nothing, saying nothing, then what is he? A person? A madman? Or something worse? Movie camera, you've made it this far, and perhaps you, like Ethan, are wondering, will justice come in time? Is that wave the end, or a promise that everything is just the beginning? Right finger, please subscribe to the After 0 Hours channel to follow the next part, when Ethan begins to suspect that Seth isn't the only one. And he came here not just to infiltrate, but to deliver a message. Thumbs up like if you ever feel like you can't rely on the law to protect your peace. Repeat button, share so someone understands. Sometimes the scariest thing is not when someone shows up, but when they stand there and never take their eyes off you. Because when the stranger walks out of the forest, it's not necessarily the time he leaves. Maybe he was just starting to look. Not all nightmares end when you open your eyes. Some continue until you decide not to let it control you anymore. 3 days have passed since the police arrested Seth, and even though he knew he was detained, Ethan still couldn't sleep deeply. The group of friends had returned to their respective homes. Everyone tried to act okay, but Ethan knew they weren't the same anymore. Kyle became quieter. Jay kept checking the door every night, and Marcus started taking self-defense classes online. As for Ethan, he still lives in that house on the edge of the forest. Partly because he hadn't had time to find another place, but deep inside, he knew he stayed because need to understand what really happened. He couldn't walk away feeling like he had been penetrated, not just by a person, but by a deeper obsession. One Wednesday night, while sitting alone in his living room, scrolling through his phone trying to find some peace in his daily routine, Ethan received a text message from a friend from school. It was a video recorded from Snapchat. Ethan opened it. The screen showed a blurry image of a house at night. Something was moving outside the window, a shadow, hunched over trying to open the window. Then a light suddenly turned on from inside the house, and the shadow immediately ran away. In about 1 second, the camera recorded the intruder's face. Not Seth. Darker skin, taller figure, but the facial expression, it's the same insensitivity. His eyes were wide and vacant, as if he were on a mission, not a crime. Ethan felt his heart grow cold. He read the caption below the video. Has anyone seen this person? He tried to break into my house at 2 a.m. Didn't take anything, just stood there watching and then left. I'm so scared. It was the house of a girl who lived just 3 houses down from Ethan. He suddenly understood. Seth isn't the only one. And chances are, he didn't act alone. Once again, the feeling of helplessness flooded back. But this time, Ethan did not choose to stay silent. The next morning, he contacted the person who posted the video. They met at a coffee shop near their house. The girl, named Marissa, trembled as she recounted the incident. Ethan reshared his story, not leaving out any details. That conversation not only made both of you feel less alone, but it was also the starting point for something positive. Ethan decided to speak up. He began recording every detail of the incident, what happened, the group's emotions, the absurdity in Seth's eyes, the phone with the boy's wallpaper, and the video from Marissa. He gathered them into a file, then proactively contacted the police, local press, and organizations supporting victims of harassment. This time, the story be heard, because it is no longer a case of strange strangers appearing and disappearing, which is one linked chain of events, with many witnesses, much evidence, and most of all, a community began to speak out. In just 2 weeks, a civil security organization was established by area residents. They began organizing self-defense skills sharing sessions, checking the street lighting system, and installing more security cameras. Police opened an extensive investigation, and during the review process, they discovered 2 other cases in the area. All describe men who appear at night. Do not destroy. Do not steal. Just stand and look. Although it is impossible to determine a clear link, with coordination between the community and authorities, these incidents are no longer considered little things. Ethan gradually regained a sense of control. He still lives in that house, but now every night before bed, he not only checks the windows, he writes a diary. He shares his feelings, both fear and recovery. He connected with people who had experienced similar things. And above all, he learned one thing: fear doesn't go away when you avoid it. It only retreats when you face it, when you tell the truth, and when you know you are not alone. Lessons learned from the story. If you have ever felt insecure, ever thought that the strange signs around you were just imagination, then please listen to yourself. Vigilance is not weakness. Sometimes, it's the attention to a small detail, like a knock. A look can save you and others from the unpredictable. Speak up. Let's stay connected. Make it your story part of the solution. Movie camera. If you followed this far, thank you for listening to Ethan's story, an ordinary person who went through something extraordinary. And instead of letting it consume him, he chose to face it. Right finger. Please click register channel after 0 hours so as not to miss true stories, full of emotions and valuable lessons from people like Ethan. Thumbs up if you find this story makes you think. Click like. Speech balloon. Please leave a comment below. What would you do if you were Ethan? Have you ever experienced anything similar? Repeat button and share this story so that many people know that there are things that seem unusual, which are actually warnings. And each of us can turn fear into action. Because sometimes, what's scary isn't what we see, it's what we choose not to look at.